I'm so disappointed that they passed a bill that removes about 24 curriculum requirements to include covering writings on the civil rights movement, on women's suffrage, on Native American history and social studies classes. This new bill removes teachings around the life and works of Cesar Chavez, writings by Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, and Martin Luther King Jr., namely the I Have a Dream speech and the letter from a Birmingham jail. But I am not without resolve. I am no less committed to being a voice that is so desperately needed today in a time that all of our progress is threatened. So let's talk about the practicality of such white supremacy. On June 18th, 2015, I sat on the 6th floor of a corporate high-rise. It was the day after white supremacist Dylan Roof shot and killed 9 Black lives. I was at my desk, grieving, traumatized, recognizing exactly where this white supremacist was from, because that town of Lexington, where he was raised, was the neighbor to the town I grew up in. And my parents taught me when I was old enough to drive, never to drive through that town after dark, because bad things could happen to me. I saw CNN news flashings of what took place. I saw them walking him out of buildings in a way that was very, very delicate and honorable, and saw flashings of them taking him to get something to eat at Burger. I mean, and I was really moved when I heard some coworkers sitting near me say, yeah, they're trying to act like this is a racial thing. I mean, come on. So I got up and I walked to the restroom, right? Because I needed to cry. I needed to sob. I needed to scream on the inside, right? And as I was walking to the door, my closest coworker friend, a white woman, she met me on the exit door, and she kept walking with me, and she said, Casey, I'm so sorry this has happened. You know, maybe you should go back to South Carolina and teach people to get an education and leave the way that you did, so that they can escape the way that you did. And I had to look at her and tell her that no matter how successful the two of us became, right? And no matter how big the houses were in the neighborhood that we would both live in, potentially one day, I would have to teach my son not to walk around his streets with a hoodie on at night, and she would never have to think of such thing, right? But for the life of me, I couldn't understand why victims of terrorism, right? Why victims of terrorism needed to do something better to not be killed. That is crazy to me. But over and over and over and over again, the oppressed needs to try harder. The oppressed needs to learn other ways of being. The oppressed needs to do their best to scrub off any indication of their Blackness so that they can be safe. When poor white people do not have to leave town to be safe. When I've never heard it being a crime for white people being undereducated. I never heard of that being a death sentence for them. But I went to the bathroom and I sobbed and I cried and I screamed on the inside and I kept on going, right? It was June 18th, 2015. I had no idea that the next day was Juneteenth because I was never taught about Juneteenth in the South where I grew up. It was actually a year later that I learned about Juneteenth because I fled North Carolina to go to California, 2,700 miles away, to start my life over after a calamity in my personal life. June of 2016 was when I fled across the country and learned about the holiday that commemorated the last of the slaves in Texas learning of their freedom 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Continuing on in slavery for 2.5 years because nobody told them they were free. It was in Oakland, California that I learned about Juneteenth, and it helped me to move differently because when you know something, you can do something. Like organize a Juneteenth celebration in a company that wasn't celebrating it and edifying Black lives and Black businesses and Black visibility because you have a voice and a know-how to challenge the status quo. But on July 22nd, in 2018, 3 sisters were attacked on a train system called BART in the Bay Area where I lived. Their throats were slashed open. One sister died. Another one was stabbed in the throat but lived. Another one was unharmed. I would take the BART from Oakland to San Francisco to work every single day. And I was so traumatized. I was so fearful for my life because I too was a Black woman. I too am a Black woman, right? So getting on that train to go to work was so frightening and traumatizing to me. And so when I got to work, I decided that this time I didn't want to be silent about my trauma and my pain and my frustration, right? That before walking outside to take a walk to clear my head and let tears flow freely, that I needed to let management know how I was feeling. And I did. I told management that I was taking a walk because I was so distraught after what had happened to the Black girl named Mia who was killed on BART. And I was told in that instance how there were other BART killings in other locations of other races, and that those victims were missed as well. That those victims were to be pitied as well. In the moment that I decided to express how I was a Black woman traumatized by the killing, by the racial killing of a white man who blindsided them, I was told that other people of other races were killed on BART too, right? Because it's more natural and instinctual and important to protect the ideals of white supremacy than it is to support a valued human who has been traumatized. And then came May 26, 2020. It was the day after George Floyd's filmed murder went viral across every news outlet, every social media posting, every article you could read online. And on that Tuesday, I logged into work with this eerie deja vu of knowing that everyone around me in the work setting would move as if nothing happened, would not say a word. And I was right. They didn't say a word, but I did. When I was asked, "How are you? Hey girl, how are you?" I answered honestly. I said that I was so sad, so disappointed, so hurt, so traumatized by what had happened to George Floyd. Responses? One woman said, and I quote, "Wow, it must have been a very hot day yesterday. Hot weather can make people cranky and irritable. The officer probably made a rash decision because of the heat." That's what was said to me, right? and this is what happens. This is what happens when we prioritize making white people comfortable about the atrocities that they've inflicted on Black and brown people for centuries and centuries and centuries, to the point where they automatically defend the terrorist and blame the victim and don't see the victim as human and don't empathize with other targets of oppression. A little later in the year, about a month later to be exact, I was moving over to take a leadership role to aid businesses that have been devastated by the impacts of the COVID pandemic. I was switching positions to lead a team, to help build out infrastructure, to help build out policies and refine systems and aid businesses that have been financially impacted. And on my way out, I was given a word of advice from a leader. And that leader said, "Casey, I just want you to be patient and understand that things take time. I need you to understand that." And he was talking about my urgency, my expressed urgency in our team, our company, our leaders, addressing racism and how disgusting it is, addressing oppression and how prevalent it is, doing something about the people that they allow to suffer as they work every single day of the year. He said, "Be patient. These things take time. Understand that." So, in essence, he was saying, heaven and high water was to be moved to save capitalism, right? This is urgent. Like, you got to go over there today. and we need the best people on the job. We need the dopest people on the job. We need the most competent people on the job to save capitalism. But I was being told to be patient about oppression, as if this country, as if this world has ever been good to Black and brown people without them having to die for it. On October 12th, 1492, Christopher Columbus set out to make it to India, China, and the Spice Islands of Asia. That's where he was going. That's where he desired to go. He didn't know that the Pacific Ocean existed, but he set out on his trip and he made it to the Bahamas instead, thinking that it was the East Indies. And because of this, because he thought he was in India, he called the natives that he encountered Indians. And he took 6 of those natives as servants on his first day there. I wonder what he did with them. Now, later that month, Christopher Columbus spotted Cuba while he was out in the Caribbean islands, and he thought that it was mainland China. That December, he landed on Hispaniola, which is an island of the Greater Antilles, in an area that's part of the West Indies. See how his story is written and where these words and these names come from, right? These heroes that we learn about. He landed on Hispaniola and he thought that it might be Japan. He took from these places in the Caribbean, thinking that it was Asia, Japan, mainland China, India. He stole, he colonized. He took a whole lot back to Spain, making them one of the richest countries ever. And in 1937, the US made Columbus Day a federal holiday, honoring Christopher Columbus for discovering a place where people already lived. This is white supremacy. In 1595, Pocahontas was born. She was the daughter of a chief, a Native American chief. We watched the movie about Pocahontas. We've read beautiful storylines of Pocahontas. Let's be clear, in 1607, when John Smith claims that Pocahontas rescued him from captivity, she was 12 years old. It was 1607. She was 12 years old. Now, the idea that Pocahontas saved James Smith from her brother who captured him is questionable. It's still questioned today by historians, but that's the story we write. That's the way we romanticize the killings, torture, stealing from Native Americans. In 1613, Pocahontas is captured by Captain Samuel Argall in the First Anglo-Powhatan War. While captive, she learns to speak English, she converts to Christianity, and she is given the name Rebecca. She's 18 years old. On June 18, 1812, President James Madison signs a declaration of war against Britain. So they began a war between US forces and the British, the French, and Native Americans over territory expansion and independence. So get that. President James Madison declares war against the British, French, and Native Americans over independence and territory expansion. 2 years later, on March 27th, 1814, Andrew Jackson, along with US forces, went and encroached upon a whole lot of Native Americans in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. The massacre was so atrocious that Creek Indians had to give up more than 20 million acres of their land after they lost. And Andrew Jackson becomes president of the United States. And on May 28th, 1830, he signs the Indian Removal Act. The Indian Removal Act, which gave plots of land west of the Mississippi River to Native American tribes in exchange for the land that was taken from them, the millions and millions of acres that was taken from them. Now, this Removal Act meant that Indians had to get up and go to these small plots of land that were earmarked for them. And so 6 years later, in 1836, the last of the Creek Native Americans left their land for Oklahoma as part of the Indian removal process. Of the 15,000 Creek Indians, who are really Native Americans, let's be clear, who made the voyage to Oklahoma, more than 3,500 did not survive. Now, fast forward 2 years later to 1838, with only 2,000 Cherokees having left their land in Georgia, President Martin Van Buren enlists troops, 7,000 troops, to speed up the process by holding them at gunpoint and marching them 1,200 miles. And as a result, more than 5,000 Cherokee Native Americans died on the journey. Now, this series of relocations of Native American tribes and the hardships and the deaths that they experienced, it would later become known as the Trail of Tears. This is white supremacy. This is history. These are the honest accounts that politicians, people, Ku Klux Klan members, white supremacists, terrorists, oppressors, people we meet in the grocery stores, people we work with on our jobs, people that lead companies, people that pastor churches do not want us understanding, because it empowers us. It gives us the ability to use discretion and challenge the status quo. In 1851, Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act, creating the Indian Reservation System. As part of this system, Native Americans aren't allowed to leave their reservations without permission. This was 1851. Now, on October 6, 1879, the first students attend the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, the country's first off-reservation boarding school. This school was created by Civil War veteran Richard Henry Pratt, and it was designed to assimilate Native American students. Understand that there were more than 350 government-funded and often church-run Indian boarding schools across the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. In these schools, Indian children were forcibly abducted by government agents, sent to schools hundreds of miles away, and beaten, starved, or otherwise abused whenever they spoke their native languages. This is history. This is not just American history. This happened in Canada. This happened all across the world. And that's just scratching the surface. That's just scratching the surface. So today I had to pause and unpack some things and teach some things so that you know, I don't care what they do because they don't write the rules for our lives. And when I say they, I'm talking about oppressors. Yep. I'm talking about people who want us to wait. Yep. I'm talking about people who are in high positions of privilege and power, who are using that power to protect white supremacy, to protect their leg up. And I'm speaking directly to you because I have committed my life to edifying those who have been historically excluded, to empowering those who are still left on the sidelines, to giving you the education, capital, and mentorship that will equip you to secure freedom for yourself and generations to come. Blaze Business Intensive is the 6-week business management course for Black women. Enroll today by going to blazebusinessintensive.com.